Hello, everyone. Welcome to episode 36 of this awesome, incredible Osu Let's Play series. In the last episode, I talked about map pools and how they're typically structured. And in this episode, I want to talk about picks and bans. And this is part of a series of episodes, this Let's Play that I'm focusing on tournaments in particular. So it's talking about tournament strategy, picks and bans, how you should go about them, and different ways you can strategize regarding picks and bans. So before I get into any of that, I want to shout out as usual that I live stream every single day over at twitch.tv/DigitalHypno. So if you would be interested in stopping by, saying hello, be happy to see you there. If you want to watch me play this game live or just hang out with me, ask me questions, anything like that. And bonus points, if you tell me that you came from this Let's Play series, I'll be very, very happy to see you there. So let's get started. So typically, let me get started with the first map, probably. Turn my volume down. Okay. So, well, actually, okay, in honor of how tournaments are typically structured, I will use Scorpio No Fail this episode as well. So, tournaments are, okay, so typically you're given 2 bans at the start of the match. So in case you need a refresher on how map pools are typically structured, I would suggest, watching the previous episode first, and then come back to this one. But yes, I would say, oh, it feels quiet. Oh, yeah, okay, there we go. So you're given 2 bans, and okay, so I want to talk about like the order in which you should ban. So you want to ban the maps that you are most likely to lose, basically. And that could either be because you are really bad at them or your opponent's very good at them. I think those are the 2 reasons that you should have. You should have one of those 2 reasons for banning a map. So either you are not good at that map and you feel like you'll lose it, or your opponent's really, really good at it and you feel like you'll lose it. So in general, just whatever map you feel like you're most likely to lose, you should ban that map. And in my opinion, okay, so I'm just going to say this straight up, like, ban order does not matter, because ideally the 2 players or the 2 teams in the match are going to be banning different things. If that's not the case, then something went wrong, I don't know. But yeah, whether or not you ban first or second, you're probably going to be banning the same thing anyway. And once the bans are done, like, it doesn't really matter who went first or second. So the only advantage, okay, so the only advantage that there is to like having a certain order is if you had a ban in mind, but then your opponent ended up banning that map, then that basically gives you another ban, if that makes sense. So if you ban second, then like maybe your opponent is thinking of banning the same map as you. But anyway, the reason why I say like if both players are planning on banning the same map, then one of them is doing something wrong, because it's not possible for both teams to lose a map. Like there's always going to be one winner and one loser of each map. So yeah, hopefully that makes sense. So ban order doesn't really matter too much, but if you do get the option, you should ban second, just because it is possible that whatever map you're thinking of banning, your opponent might end up banning that. So yes, that is ban strategy. Okay, so for picks, so pick strategy is, I think, a bit more complicated. And long story short, ideally you also want to go second, and it's for a similar reason to banning second. But so the thing with picking is that, okay, so some people say like you want to pick first because you have momentum if you win your first pick. But in reality, I think it's just like a strategy handicap if you pick first, because you want to be able to respond to your opponent's moves, basically. And okay, so I think there's like 2 main reasons for picking second. First is that you get to respond to your opponent on like whatever they pick. And also when, okay, so if the match is very, very close, then you are going to have the last pick before tiebreaker. Because like, let's say my opponent picks something and then the score is like 1-0, and I pick something and it's 1-1. And that just keeps happening. So let's say it's first to 5 points. So if the score is 4-3, then I'm the one who has the next pick to decide whether or not we go to tiebreaker. And having that strategical advantage is, I think, a lot more powerful than like having the first pick of the match. Because actually, when you have the first pick of the match, you're kind of just going in blind, I feel like. If that makes sense, because you don't actually know, like, does that kind of make sense? Okay, also, like, if you're, to those of you who like sort of get nervous in the first few maps of the match, like, you would rather get those nerves out on your opponent's first pick rather than your first pick. So yeah, and actually, okay, speaking of that, so okay, so actually picking aim consistency first, especially if you feel like your opponent might be a little more nervous than you or like not used to the tournament environment, it could actually be a viable strategy to pick like something aim consistency or something that requires a lot of focus, because your opponent might just not be like super eased into the match, might just get like random misses or something like that. So it's possible. If your opponent's very experienced, then that probably won't work as well, but it is something that you can consider as far as like first picks. And likewise, if you are someone who's pretty inexperienced or like tends to get nervous at the starts of matches, then probably pick something that takes a bit less focus or aim consistency would be my advice. But for the most part, so like your reasons for picking a map should be pretty much the opposite of the reasons why you would ban something. So basically, either you think you'll win it because you're good at that map, or you think you'll win it because your opponent is bad at it. Those are, I think, the two reasons why you would pick something. And it really depends on how you're feeling that day as well, I feel like. Like, you might be like typically not very comfortable with streams. Then let's say that your tapping hand is just going crazy, like the match adrenaline or something like that. You're just going insane. Or maybe like in practice, there was a map that like, there was a map that you couldn't read very comfortably, but then you practiced it a lot and now you're feeling comfortable. Like, just because you got low scores in practice doesn't mean that it's not a good pick. And also, like, keep in mind, okay, so I think the most important thing that, like, one of the most important things that I've learned about Osu tournaments, I guess, is that it's not about getting a good score. It's just about getting a higher score than your opponent. That's all that matters. So yeah, it doesn't matter if you get 100,000 points, like 100k. If your opponent got like 80k or 70k, then you're gonna win that map. So it really doesn't matter. Yeah, I think hopefully that makes sense. Okay, let's see. Where should I take this next? Okay, so strategizing for team tournaments. I think it's just important to like have a feel for. Oh, okay. I know what I can talk about. Okay, so for one, it's obviously important to have a feel for how your teammates are feeling as well. Like, let's say if you were to pick a stream stamina map, then it would heavily rely on like 1 or 2 players on your team that you know are very good at that stuff. But if they're just not feeling very warm that day, or like something's like they're not playing very well, then probably try to avoid those maps. And okay, also chances are your opponent wouldn't pick the stamina maps either if they know that you have very good stream players. So it could actually be possible that you like okay, I don't know if that makes sense. Like, if your stream player is not playing very well, but if they were playing well, then you'd be really good at those maps. Then you're avoiding those maps because you know that you would lose it, but your opponent's not going to pick it because they think that you're going to win it. So pretty viable option to just like straight up ignore maps. And that's another thing, actually, when you're strategizing, try to get a feel for like which maps you think are just not going to get picked at all, because sometimes that's possible to figure out. Like, if you try to guess what your opponent's picks are going to be and you predict what your picks are going to be, then I think you'll end up finding some maps that seem very unlikely for either team to pick. Obviously, you can't be completely sure, but yeah, I think just in my own experience, I think it's the free mod maps that typically don't get touched. If anything, I think free mod is less commonly picked in my experience, although I don't think it's really a rule. I think people just don't feel super confident picking free mods. But I mean, it depends sometimes. Okay, so like if your opponent has like okay, so let's say like you're against another team and they're all heavily biased towards like hard rock. like they're not comfortable with low approach rate hidden or something like that, then you might want to pick a low approach rate free mod map, that like some map that's very hidden biased basically, because if there's a free mod map that's a lot easier with hidden, but you know your opponents are gonna end up going hard rock, then that's like, I think you're basically just playing an easier map than them if you're able to go hidden on that map, if that makes sense. So yes, that is that. A couple other things. So, oh, Kablaze, what the heck? It's a good score. When is this from? A couple months ago. Oh, hey guys, the year is 2021 and April was just a couple months ago. Oh, okay. So, I think regarding understanding your opponent, okay, so I think like picking for the sake of like having, okay, so in a team tournament, there's usually some players that are better than others in like within a given team. But those players that are like sort of objectively have a lower skill cap, they exist on the team to go in for specific kinds of maps, but they're probably not going to be as consistent or like get a very strong score compared to like whatever their best players are good at, if that makes sense. Basically, like, so if you're against a team that's overall very strong, but they don't really have like a full lineup for stream maps, like stream stamina, like okay, so let's say it's a 4v4 and they only have 3 good stream players, then, and you know that you have like 4 at least somewhat decent stream players, then you can probably go for a pick on a map like that, because they're gonna have one player basically tanking score, like sort of there just to get like 100,000 points. So yeah, hopefully that makes sense. Understanding like who their weakest link is and picking maps that you know that their weakest link is going to have to go in for. That sort of strategy I think works pretty well in team tournaments. In 1v1s, okay, actually 1v1s, yeah, definitely strategies are different in team tournaments versus 1v1s. Okay, let's see. I think for 1v1s, it's actually, okay, it's easier and I think also harder to strategize, because on one hand, you don't have to worry about like team dynamic and like understanding, because like you know exactly how you're feeling, like how warmed up you feel, but it's hard to know how warmed up your teammates are feeling. So in that sense, like if you feel pretty confident on a certain kind of map in a 1v1, like you can just pick it. Yeah. I would also say, so if you're against someone who just like seems so much better than you at everything, then I'd probably just recommend picking whatever you feel most confident in getting a good score, and just kind of hope that your opponent misses. Because sometimes you're against someone who just kind of has no weakness, or even if they do have a weakness, they're still better at that skill than you. So I think in those cases, it's not really worth picking something in hopes that your opponent does bad. And you should just pick stuff and try your best to get the best score that you can. But and also I think getting a feel for how your opponent is like doing on that specific day is also really important. Like if you pick some aim consistency map, or like let's say your opponent picked aim consistency and they actually didn't do as well as you expected, then that might be a sign that you can probably pick aim consistency. Like maybe their aim is just not feeling super good that day, or something like that. And obviously it can apply to any skill. So yeah, and then that is like information that you can use to your advantage to, like, I don't know, decide on your own picks. And I guess that's another reason why picking second, or like picking after your opponent does, is always, I think, more of an advantage, because you have the previous map performances as intel, basically, for what maps you should pick. So hopefully that makes sense. Let's see, let's pick one more map, I think. Oh, classic guys is a pretty short one, I think. Okay. Yeah, although I'm not really sure. Okay, so keep in mind also, like, so by the time you get to tiebreaker, okay, so ideally you have second pick, but okay, so let's just assume that you have second pick, or even still, like towards the end of the match, let's say it seems like you Okay, so you've been avoiding stream maps because you feel like your opponent would win on them. But let's say it's towards the end of the match and not many picks are left, and neither of you have picked any stream maps. Then if you feel like you can sort of at least hold your own on that map, then it might actually be worth picking. Because even if you don't feel like you'll get a very good score, you have to understand that right, like I said earlier, it's not about getting a good score. It's just about getting a higher score than your opponent. Because like you could get like a 1x100 FC, like 990k, and if your opponent SS's, then you're going to lose the map. So it really doesn't matter how good your score is. All that matters is that it's better than your opponent. So yeah, with that, if you find that your opponent has been avoiding a certain kind of map, then it could be worth trying to pick if you have nothing else in mind. But also your opponent might end up thinking the same thing, I guess. Like if you have other picks in mind and both players have been avoiding streams, then eventually your opponent might end up picking streams just because you haven't been picking it. So especially if you know that your opponent is somewhat decent at streams, then they might end up just picking those maps if you've been avoiding them. Although, it also, yeah, it depends on the dynamic and like what you know about each other. Oh, okay, also one thing. Okay, so this doesn't always work, but sometimes I pick like stamina intensive maps as warm-up, and then I intentionally do really bad. Like, let's say I'm actually pretty warm for like my tapping hand, then sometimes I will pick like a stamina map as warm-up and intentionally get a bad score so that my opponent thinks that my stamina is not super good that day. And then I'll say in the chat like, OMG, my hands are so cold, not warm at all. And then sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. I remember there was a tournament I played, like a 1v1 in like 2017, and at the time I think like people thought that I couldn't read AR above 10 very comfortably. So I remember like in the tournament Discord server, I remember talking about how like I wasn't very comfortable with 10.3, even though like the map that was in the map pool that was 10.3, I could play pretty comfortably. And then come the match, my opponent ended up picking it against me, and I won that map. And then they were like, "What? Since when can you read 10.3 AR?" And I was like, I don't know. So little deceptive mind games like that, always fun. But yeah, just a quick little episode. I wanted to talk about my thoughts on picks and bans, strategy, things like that. TLDR, if you get the option to, you should always pick second, ban second. Actually, maybe I should tell you guys to choose first, so that if I'm ever playing against you guys, then you will pick the wrong option. No. But yeah, definitely going second for the reasons that I discussed earlier is, I think, the best strategy. But that's just about going to do it for today's episode. Hopefully you learned something new. If you have topics for future episodes, be sure to put them in the comments, because I do read all the comments on these videos. And if you're watching in the future, check out my channel, watch my future videos, because I upload these every single day. And also stop by my Twitch streams. I'd be very happy to see you guys there. If you want to discuss anything from this episode further, I'd be very happy to talk about it with anyone. But yeah, with that, we'll see you guys next time.